Good afternoon, it's John Heaton, and I'm going to do part 2 of the Beatles meetings post-split because unbelievably I managed to miss out quite a few in the last video, although I did do some research, but I managed to miss Clapton's wedding in '79, apologise for that, so we'll cover it on this video. So George, Paul and Ringo were all in attendance. John Lennon was not invited for some reason, although he lived in America, so he probably may not have come over, but apparently he did phone Eric later and said if I'd been invited he would have come. So it would have been a Beatles reunion, at least they would have met. Whether they would have all jammed together on stage, there was some jamming going on at that party, by all accounts not particularly accomplished. I think everyone was maybe a bit wasted. So it's covered in this book of Patty's, Wonderful Tonight, not in much detail. She just says, George, Paul and Ringo came. For some reason John wasn't invited, but he said he would have come if he'd been asked, which was sad because if he had, it would have been the first and last time the Beatles played together since the breakup, because the next year he was dead. So hardly a mention in that book. In Clapton's autobiography, he talks about it, but he seems to have spent most of the party in a room upstairs getting stoned, so I think he missed most of the party. And he says in the book, George, Paul and Ringo also played, only missing John, who later phoned me to say he would have been there if he'd known about it. How that came about, I'll never know. Suffice to say, I had little to do with the invitations, but a great opportunity was lost for the Beatles to reform for one last performance. Patty had also made the mistake of giving our bedroom to Mick Jagger. Okay, that's getting off point a bit. He also remembers Denny Lane's wife, Jojo, hogging the mic. Jack Bruce was also there, Mick Jagger, Bill Wyman, Jeff Beck. So I don't think Clapton can tell you much about that Beatles meeting because he was pretty wasted by all accounts. So the other meeting I want to cover in more detail is the '74 meeting of John and Paul, because I mentioned it briefly in the last one. And then I had a request to talk about the possible hand that Paul had in John and Yoko getting back together. So Paul had met Yoko in London, and according to Paul, he asked Yoko whether she still loved John and whether she wanted what it would take for John to get back together with her. And Yoko said he's going to have to start from scratch and do it flowers and all that, and get to know each other that way and work hard to get back to me. And anyway, I don't know how much of this is true, but apparently Paul relayed the message to John and then they did get back together. So Paul has kind of claimed some credit for getting them back together, which Yoko has distanced herself from. Paul never made the comments in John's lifetime, so we'll never know how much truth there was in that. I think that probably the truth is somewhere in the middle between Paul's account and Yoko's account. Shouldn't think he was the one factor which got them back together, but he may have helped a little bit. Also on that meeting in '74, it's covered in May Pang's book, Loving John. She recounts quite a few meetings between John and Paul in '74, particularly the one where they jammed in the studio. John and Paul made small talk as if they'd been speaking on the phone 2 or 3 times a day and had just spoken a few hours earlier. It was one of the most casual conversations I had ever heard. They couldn't be the two men who not only had been trading vicious attacks with each other in public, but also had squadrons of lawyers poised in battle against each other while they carved up their multi-million-dollar empire. They looked like any pair of old friends having a pleasant, low-key reunion. And then he goes on to say how they made good music. Paul went on the drums and they couldn't find a bass player, so they borrowed a producer from next door. Stevie Wonder was around, Lennon was on guitar, they did Midnight Special. And May Pang says they made joyous music together that night. Well, I've got the bootleg, and it's a pretty sorry affair. It's there was cocaine in the studio. You can tell because John's offering some to Stevie at one stage. it's a ropey performance. It's not worthy of a proper reunion. It wasn't a proper reunion. It's not polished. It's not even, doesn't even have a sort of casual charm to it. It's pretty hard going listening to it, and so I haven't listened to it for years. Maybe I'll put it on and see. I seem to remember Lucille is about the most passable number, and Stand By Me, but very disappointing. So there was the near miss of '75 where Paul invited John to come down to New Orleans to help him record the Venus and Mars album, and John was all set to go, and then got back together with Yoko and decided not to come. So a lot of people say that, you know, if he hadn't got back together with Yoko, he might have jammed with Paul. He might have appeared on the record. I don't know. It's possible. He might have gone down there and hung out with him. I don't think it would have led to a full-scale reunion, though. It's my opinion. Just to cover the Bangladesh concert, I mentioned that all four of them could have been there, and George invited the other three, and only Ringo came. And then Peter Doggett, in his book "You Never Give Me Your Money," says rather cruelly that the Beatles rejected the chance to do something to save the Bangladeshi people, and they could have raised a lot of money, but they chose to put their personal feelings first and didn't reunite, as if the obligation is on them to save the world. And Lennon said in many interviews that he's been benefited to death, and you know, why didn't the Beatles give everything on earth for 10 years? Why should he give more? And I'm kind of in John's camp there. I don't think Peter Doggett is right to put the moral blame on the Beatles for not reforming, even if the money had all gone to charity. I don't think they were obliged to reform, and I think in '71 it would have been quite strange if they had reformed. It would have been against everything that had happened that year, and they just, you know, and I think Paul said, "Blimey, what's the point? We've just broken up." So I think they did the right thing not to turn up, apart from the fact that George didn't want Yoko on the bill, so that didn't help. And apparently the next year, when John was getting nervous before his New York City concert, Madison Square Garden, he phoned Paul and asked him to come on stage with him. And again, for similar reasons, Paul turned it down, probably because he thought, you know, what's the point? We've just broken up. So I think, again, that would have been a bit strange had McCartney appeared in that concert just when he was trying to start something new with Wings. So anyway, so that covered, and also one commenter said that, you know, how come I claim to know everything, and how do I know all the meetings which took place? Well, I don't. I'm just going on what's documented. There could have been other secret meetings or unpublicized meetings. I mean, that Clapton wedding went under the radar for many years and wasn't exactly blasted all over the newspapers, those pictures. The picture in the thumbnail is a picture of Paul, George and Ringo at that wedding with Lonnie Donegan. So, yeah, I don't claim to know everything. There's other meetings, and it's fascinating to imagine if the four of them had got together in one room, if only to have a cup of tea, like George said. But I don't think they did, but who knows? So thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.